Hello my friends and welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have my top 20 historical romance books that I read in 2021, and I also have some honorable mentions that I'm going to talk about towards the end. I adore historical romance. It is my absolute favorite subgenre of romance and what I read the most, and I felt like I read some really excellent books in 2021, way more than I could fit into my top 10 list. So we're going to go over the books that I read. These are in no particular order, although the first one is definitely a top favorite of mine. It probably is one of my favorites of the year. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of books to talk about. So the first book that I want to mention is Waiting for a Scot Like You by Ava Leigh. This is book 3 in her Union of the Rake series. This book was fantastic. This was so fun, so sexy, so swoony. It was just a complete joy to read. I've talked about this book so much and I will never stop talking about it because I love it that much. This is an older woman, younger man romance where our heroine Beatrice is a widow. She's definitely been a little suppressed in her life. Her husband really sort of kept her under his thumb. And now that he has passed away and her children are grown, she has freedom that she never had before, and she has money of her own to spend. So she decides the thing she's going to do is go to an orgy and just enjoy herself and have a grand old time. Her friends are a little concerned about her making the trek there alone and unchaperoned, so they offer the services of Duncan McCameron, who has served in the military, to be her escort to make sure she gets there safely. Duncan McCameron is a Scottish hero who is so completely just that stern, gruff Scottish hero that we love, but he is so soft for Beatrice. He's just like bowled over by not only her beauty, but her presence and her desire to just find happiness in every moment of life. And it is so beautiful watching this big, strong man lust after her and really want more of a relationship than just a physical relationship. And that's really all Beatrice is interested in, you know. She's been married, she's lived a life confined, and she doesn't want to have that life anymore. But of course, she ends up falling for him as well. This book was so beautiful, it was so steamy, it was just a ton of fun. I adored it so much, and if you haven't read this yet, please pick it up because it's so good. Okay, and the next book, which is also one of my favorites of the year, is The Earl Takes All by Lorraine Heath. This is what is very lovingly referred to as the Gorilla Twins romance. This is such an interesting plot where we have our hero who was a twin, and his brother was married to a woman who he loved. They were trying to have children. They had some difficult pregnancies and some loss, and she's finally with child when these two twin brothers decide to go on this safari. While they're there, the brother whose wife is pregnant is killed. They're twins. So the brother who survives, who is not married to the woman, comes back and poses as her husband. But he's not her husband. It's like so bonkers of a plot, but it is so good and so angsty and just beautiful because the brother who wasn't married to her has secretly pined for her for years, and he has so many feelings for her, and it's just absolutely beautiful, so much fun. I adored this book so much. I read this early on in 2021, and it still sticks in my memory as one of the most deliciously angsty books that I've ever read. So good. Okay, the next book that I really loved is The Raven Prince by Elizabeth Hoyt. I love Elizabeth Hoyt. I will definitely have another of her books in this video for sure. This book was so fun and also very unique. Like, I really love the unique setup of this, where this is another widow romance, and she's living with her mother-in-law, and they're in some pretty bad financial situation. And so the heroine is trying to find some type of job, some type of way to earn an income for the two of them, when she hears about the Earl, who has an opening for a secretary. Nevertheless, that has never been fulfilled by a woman. She goes to apply for the job anyway, and on the way there, she is almost like run over by this man in a carriage. So come to find out, the man in the carriage is none other than the Earl. He hires her as his secretary. He's a very gruff, very stern hero who of course doesn't want to love her but can't help himself, and they have this very passionate relationship. Pretty soon, the heroine finds out that the Earl is going to like the most notorious brothel in town, or has a desire to go there. She doesn't want him to go there and be with other women, so she goes to work at the brothel as the woman that he would be with, and it's just a good old time. I really loved this book. Again, a little bit angsty. I love this gruff hero who completely falls for the heroine, and a pretty unique plot. I really, really like this, and as is typical for Elizabeth Hoyt, this was extremely steamy and very great in that way. Okay, the next book that I have to mention is The Ruin of a Rake by Cat Sebastian. This is an MM historical romance, and this is one of the most beautiful love stories that I have ever read. This book follows Lord Courtney, who is a rogue, a scoundrel, a rake, and he has recently sort of come under a lot of fire from the Ton, which has led to him not being able to see his nephew, who he loves and cares for, because he has become the star of this series of stories that have been written and talked about that basically explain all of his salacious exploits. So everything that he does has been made known to the public, and he's in scandal and can't see his nephew. So enter Julian, whose sister is friends with Lord Courtney, and she asks Julian, could you please help bring him back in society, get his reputation up so that he can go and see his nephew. There is a plot twist in here which has their Lord Courtney and Julian's lives entwined, which is interesting, and you could probably figure out just from what I've said so far, but if not, then you definitely want to check this one out. And along the way, as Julian is trying to teach Lord Courtney, or to repair his reputation, they end up really having strong desires for one another and falling in love with one another, and it is so beautiful. I really, really love Lord Courtney's character and how he has such tender feelings for Julian, despite his reputation of being such a rake. It was just absolutely lovely. I adored this romance. Okay, another book that I read early on in 2021 is Scoundrel of My Heart by Lorraine Heath. I love this book so much. This romance in here is so beautiful. There's some really excellent pining in here and some very, forbidden type of love, and the hero just desires this heroine so much. Not only just physically, but also, he wants her to be his so badly. It makes me just sigh thinking about this book. Okay, so these two were actually friends. The heroine was friends with the hero's sister when they were young. The heroine has a season of coming out, and she is determined to land the Duke as her husband, because if she does that, then she gets to inherit this beautiful seaside cottage that her grandmother has left to her. If she doesn't, then she doesn't get to have that beautiful home. Griffith is the spare. He is the second son, and he is a little bit of a scoundrel of my heart. And so he sort of conspires with the heroine to get the Duke on her side and sort of win the Duke over to the heroine. But some pretty big plot things happen that separate the heroine and the hero, and he is cast out from society. His father loses his title, and he has to basically scramble his way up from the dregs of society to try and support his family. And in doing so, he ends up establishing this gaming hell, this brothel that is all about basically spinsters and second sons. It's fantastic. He ends up meeting the heroine after he has already set up this club, and he's under the impression that she is engaged to the Duke, but their feelings, their love cannot be denied. It's beautiful. It's so completely beautiful. I really especially loved the epilogue in here. It's so swoony. This book is so romantic. I loved it so much. Okay, and the next book on my list is Darling Beast by Elizabeth Hoyt. This is part of her Maiden Lane series. I have an entire video dedicated to this series where I review and rate each of the books in it. This was a huge, huge joy. Early on in 2021, I read the entire series. It was so much fun. I absolutely loved it. Basically, this book is so beautiful. We have a scarred, damaged hero who was beaten so badly that he now is mute, that he does not speak. He was falsely accused of murder and has since escaped and has found refuge in this burned down old opera theater, where he ends up seeing Lily, who is this very acclaimed London actress, where she has come to live here with her maid and her young son. They have this extremely fiery connection, but it quickly develops into other feelings too. They have a really deep romance. The hero does some really tender things with her son. It's absolutely beautiful. I adore a damaged hero romance. I love, love, love Apollo, this big giant man. We've seen him in a few other books in the Maiden Lane series where we get his backstory, but watching him in here interact with the heroine and with her son, and watching him really want to care for and protect them, and how tender he was with both of them, but also like the passion that he has for Lily was just so beautiful. This is my favorite book in the series. I loved it so much, and it's just fantastic. Okay, now I took on a big project in 2021 where I wanted to read all of Lisa Kleypas' backlist. I did not quite get all of it done, but I read many of her books. They have showed up on all of my lists, contemporary and historical. I had 3 of her books in my top 10 books of the year, and I truly came to love and admire her books so much. I do have an entire video also dedicated to the Ravenels and the Wallflower series, where I review and talk about each of the books and which ones were my favorites. And yeah, so some of her books are in here. I didn't put as many as I dearly loved because if I had done that, it would be nothing but a Lisa Kleypas gush video. But I do have a few standouts here, and one of them for sure is Devil's Daughter. Oh my gosh, I love this book so much. This book is so deeply satisfying for me, someone who really, really wants a very romantic book that has a little bit of heartbreak but is so deeply emotional. I just loved it so much. This again has a heroine who is a widow who deeply loved her husband. They married even though her husband was sick, sort of sickly growing up, and he knew that he wasn't going to survive long, but Phoebe loved him so much that they agreed to marry, and they had some children. It's so beautiful, oh my gosh. Enter West Ravenel, who is a rogue, who is a rake, who we've met in previous books in the Ravenels, and we see him and we know that he's a little bit of a jokester too, and we see this interaction between him and Phoebe, and it is at times like verbally sparring because West has a little bit of a backstory where he was a bit of a bully to Phoebe's beloved passed away husband, so there's that level that is sort of like separating them. But West wants her and desires her and wants to take care of her, and he's sort of bowled over by the feelings that he has developing for her, and especially for her children too, how much he loves and cares for them, and it was just so beautiful. Honestly, I feel like this is one of Lisa Kleypas' best books. I feel like it is so utterly beautiful, and just that achingly romantic vibe that Lisa does in her best books, like I feel like that is very evident here, and I just loved it so much. This will always be a favorite book of mine. I adore these two and their romance. All right, this next one took me 2 times to read it and get into it, but once I did, I had to concede that y'all were right, the hype was real, and that is none other than Lord of Scoundrels. I do not have the beautiful original cover, I have this new edition, but that does not dim my love for this book. Oh my goodness, I adore this book so freaking much. Jessica Trent is literally one of the most perfect historical romance heroines I have ever read about. I adore this strong woman. There was a point in this book when the hero does something to the heroine, and the way she gets back at him just, like, perfection. Absolute perfection. I'd never seen anything done like that in historical romance before, and it just was so fitting for her character that I was like, I love you so much, Jessica Trent. You are my new favorite character of all time. But this also has a very damaged hero in it. This is classic historical romance, and it's a classic for a good reason. This is an excellent book. I loved it so much. The tension between these two, like the enemies to lovers vibes, top tier. And y'all know I don't love enemies to lovers that much anymore, but these two had an excellent enemies to lovers vibes, and when this man, oh my gosh, like the way that he burned with her with passion, like the subtle gestures in here that were just charged with so much sexual tension and longing. It was everything. I loved this book so much, and y'all were right. Y'all were right, okay? Okay, you were right. It was fabulous. The funny thing is that the next two books also have Scoundrel in the title. Hee hee. Okay, so this book is Desperately Seeking a Scoundrel by Elisa Braden. I ended up deep diving into Elisa Braden this last year. Jesson from Jesson Reads Romance had found her, and I was like, I want to read those too. And so I did, and this is part of her Rescue from Ruin series. This is book 3, I believe. This follows Colin, who we have seen in the first 2 books. Colin is something of a very damaged hero. He's definitely sort of villainized in the first 2 books, and I think that it is for a good reason, you know? The things that he does really sort of make him an unlikable character. So I was so excited, but also nervous to get his book because I wanted him to have this great redemption arc so badly, and I really feel like he got one. It was so satisfying to me. He is being hunted by this criminal, and he ends up meeting the heroine Sarah, whose father runs this school for girls, who's basically sort of preparing them to enter society, but her father is ill and is dying, and so her and her mother know that if they don't either find a way to say that she's married or engaged, then they're going to be out of money shortly because she needs that security to be able to teach at this school, or she's going to have to take an engagement offer from a man who is despicable and who she does not want to have a thing to do with. So she ends up finding Colin, who is basically beaten and left on the road in the rain, and she takes him home with her and cares for him and brings him back to health. And she realizes she has this opportunity to say, hey, would you pose as my fiance so that I can get this teaching job? And Colin is wanting to help her because of how she took care of him, but also because he has feelings for her, like passionate feelings for her. But he doesn't want to drag her into his mess with this criminal who is hunting him. So he reluctantly agrees, and then as they have this sort of fake courtship and then they're torn apart by other circumstances, their feelings for one another just continue to grow and deepen, but they sort of suppress them and don't act on them until later on in the book. And it was so beautiful. The way that Colin loved this heroine was just so beautiful. And I feel like without really seeing his backstory in the first 2 books, you could still read this. But I think if you want that ultimate satisfaction of a hero's redemption arc, I would recommend reading the first 2 books because it really gives you the backstory for him. Also, those books are great too. But this is my favorite in the series. I really, really loved this hero. I loved his redemption. I loved how he pined for this woman and wanted her to be his so badly. It was just beautiful. Loved it. Okay, the next book that I really, really loved was The Perks of Loving a Scoundrel by Jennifer McQuiston. This book was just so fun. This had such a fun background plot. This had a really feisty heroine. This had a rascal of a hero who, against his better judgment, is so drawn to this lady and wants to just have her. It was beautiful. The heroine is very smart. She's very brave. In the beginning, she's definitely a little bit sheltered and a little bit suppressed a little bit, but as she develops more of her personality and sees that she has a little bit of freedom that she wants to take advantage of, and the way that she's able to use her mind in solving this big case that's going on in the background, it was just really, really beautiful. I loved how our heroine in the beginning is such a bookish heroine who really doesn't have adventures of her own, and she's going to visit her sister who is in her confinement. She decides she's going to go read her book in the garden, and as she does so, she sees our hero. This is in the early hours of the morning. She sees our hero, who is drunk from being out all night, peeing on the rose bushes, and she's like so scandalized, and he's like, hey, sweetheart, how's it going? It was just such a fun meet cute, and then the way they kept running into each other, the way they almost had a scandal created when they were almost caught together when they were trying to find out clues for this case. It was so fun. It was just different than anything that I had read up to that point. It has a little bit different of a feel, a little bit different of a plot, but the romance still is so central, and they have such great chemistry, and I really, really loved this couple and the overall story being told here. This was just such a ton of fun and a highlight of the year for me. Okay, now this book is one of my favorites, and it was almost on my top 10 of the year, and it is The Duke by Catherine Ashe. This book has such an epic, sweeping, like a period historical movie feel to it. Like it really spans a great amount of time in this couple's life, and the way that they have this love that they sort of like can't act on, but they still have these moments where they're expressing, I want you, but I can't have you. Like, it was just so beautiful, and I loved it so much. So if you like that type of pining, old school, really deeply romantic, epic feel, like, I would highly recommend this book. I thought it was so great. I loved it. I loved this author's writing style. I loved her use of words. I loved the way that she so thoughtfully built this story out of these tiny, small moments that piece together create this absolutely beautiful romantic picture. Oh, I just loved it so much. It starts with our heroine, who is a very naive young heroine. She's engaged to this preacher, and she thinks everything's going to be great. Her whole life is going to be perfect because she's married to this man of God. So the preacher decides to go on a mission trip to Jamaica, and she goes with him. Shortly after, when they're there, a tropical storm comes through, and she finds herself in the basement of a building with Gabriel, who is actually a naval captain at the time. They stay in that storm shelter together until the storm is over, and there's this really beautiful moment where they're in the dark and they think that they're maybe gonna die, and they very tentatively but passionately hold hands. It's so completely beautiful. That scene just won me over for the whole thing. So that even though there were times when they were apart, there were difficulties in each other's lives, I still was so invested in the story because those small moments were just like so powerful to me and evocative of this deeper love they had for each other. I loved it so much. So in any case, when they leave each other the next day, when they're sort of clearing up the wreckage and everything like that, he finds out that she's engaged to be married to this preacher. He asks her to wait for him to come back from this journey he's going on, and she agrees. She receives word that he actually was killed at sea, and so she goes forward with her marriage to the preacher. The preacher passes away a few years later, and the Duke finds out that she was married. So he comes back, and they realize that they're both free. They had this big misunderstanding, and their romance ensues. It was beautiful. It was epic. It was sweeping. It was amazing. I loved it so much. All right, now this book, I had an arc of this book, and from the very beginning when I read this, I was like, this is really going to be something special, because the couple in here had such a passionate connection that had this underlying layer of emotion that I deeply loved, that was just perfection. This is Kit and Alice. Alice is looking for ways to attract a man. She feels like she has to marry to get out from underneath the thumb of her mother, who is extremely cruel and callous with Alice. Like, she belittles her in public, she calls her names, she is just terrible to Alice, and Alice wants nothing more than freedom from her mother. So she knows she has to marry to do that. So she goes to Kit, who is known for being quite a ladies' man, and she asks him basically to give her lessons on how to attract a man, how to make a man want her so badly that he will propose marriage to her. And Kit begrudgingly does, and it is so beautiful. Like, honestly, there were some really delicious makeout scenes in here where the tension was just so high and you could just feel their connection before they ever progress to anything further in the bedroom, and I just loved that so much because I feel like we don't get enough of that. We don't get enough of that drawn out tension and those really passionate scenes that can still have a ton of passion even with their clothes on, you know? Like, I just loved that so much. I felt like this couple is just fantastic. The emotion in this book was so true and heartfelt, and I just adored this couple. This was one of my favorite books of the year. I loved it so freaking much. It was delightful. Okay, and the next book that I really loved was Wild Rain by Beverly Jenkins. This was her latest release last year. The heroine in this book is so spirited. She is so independent. She is a horse breeder and a horse trainer, and she ends up rescuing this newspaper man who has come to report about the lives of black doctors out here. But when he is sort of rescued by the heroine, he is definitely feeling a lot of feelings for her. And one of the things that I really loved about their romance is how much he admires her independence and her ability to do things on her own and not to really be any type of like a shrinking lady. Like, she is fiercely independent and she is very capable and she's so strong, and he really has this desire to sort of have all of that focus directed at him, and it's just beautiful. I loved this romance so much. I love Beverly Jenkins. This was a fabulous read. Alright, another favorite book of mine is The Perks of Loving a Wallflower by Erica Ridley. This is a sapphic historical romance, and this was so beautiful. I adored this couple so much. They were so sweet and so tender. Tommy is our heroine, who is part of the Winchester family, and she is sort of known for being able to really disguise herself and come across as any gender, any type of character. She's really got a knack for that. She ends up working with our other heroine, Miss Philippa York, who wants to try and find who the right author of these Blue Stocking Papers was, because it's being credited to a man, and she wants the woman who wrote it to get the right credit. So they end up working together, and Philippa doesn't really feel like she's been attracted to any men at all. She's had arrangements, she's had suitors, and none of them have caught her eye, and so she's just feeling like, maybe I'm just not meant to love or desire anyone. So when she meets Tommy, Tommy is dressed as a young man, and she's led to believe that he's courting her. That's quickly sort of explained, and Tommy introduces herself as actually Tommy, the woman. But Philippa had feelings for Tommy when she was dressed as a young man, and she's a little surprised to see that when Tommy is a woman, she still has those same feelings. She still desires her, and it's really her awakening to this realization that she might have really strong feelings for Tommy, and it's just so beautiful. It's so beautifully done. This was very sweet. It was also steamy. It was just an absolute delight. I loved this book so much. Okay, another favorite book of mine is another Lisa Kleypas, and it is Love in the Afternoon. This is book 5 in her Hathaway series. This book follows Beatrix, who we have seen in the previous Hathaway novels, and she definitely has had an issue. She was the one who would kind of steal things and not be able to help herself, and that comes back into the story in here, and I had completely forgotten that she had that issue in previous books. She has been actually writing letters to Captain Christopher Phelan under the assumption of another woman, because he's been away serving in the military at war, and the woman that he believed he was going to marry didn't want to write him anymore. So Beatrix felt so bad and is like, but he's counting on you writing these letters. So she takes over and writes the letters, and these two have this romance develop through the letters that they're writing to one another. But Christopher doesn't realize that it's not the woman he thinks he's supposed to marry, that it's Beatrix. Angst, tension. It was so beautiful. I loved this romance. It was just, this book is another top-tier Lisa Kleypas. I loved their communication through the letters. I really loved once he realizes that it's actually Beatrix, and how he has these feelings for her that he can't deny, even though he feels like he was sort of duped. He still wants this woman who understood him and who saw him, and it was just beautiful. I loved it so much. Okay, another standout book for me is actually Slightly Wicked by Mary Belloc. This is this the second book? This is the second book in the Bedouin family saga, and it was so good. I was honestly so surprised at how much I loved this book, because I sort of felt like maybe the setup would be something that didn't jive with me. It's basically our heroine who is going to stay with her cousin. So Judith is on her way to become a companion to her very wealthy aunt, and she's in the stagecoach when it just becomes overturned. Enter Ranulph Bedouin, who comes to the rescue, takes this young woman to rescue her. They end up at an inn. There's only one room, one bed. They stay there together. Ranulph is under the impression that Judith is actually this actress who is a very, woman of the world and has all these other ways, and he is completely gobsmacked with her and just desires her and wants her so badly. So when they're in that inn together, they have this incredible night of passion. It's Judith's first time. Ranulph has no idea that that is the case. He still believes her to be this actress, and then they part ways. And come to find out, when Judith arrives at her aunt's home, she sees Ranulph there as well and realizes he's one of the eligible bachelors of the Bedouin family, and that he's actually there to woo and wed her cousin. But Ranulph doesn't want the cousin once he realizes Judith is there. He wants Judith, and there's so much tension, so much angst, a little bit of heartbreak, and it's just fabulous. I really love what Mary Belloc does with these characters, how she gives them such really sort of on the surface simple characteristics and simple situations that aren't really out there too much, but she makes them so rich and detailed and so compelling. I just can't get enough of her writing in this series. I loved it so much. Okay, the next book that I read was one of the last books that I read in 2021, and it is A Scoundrel of Her Own by Stacey Reid. I love this book so freaking much. It's one of my favorite historicals that I've read in a really long time. This is the story of two children who meet in this strange circumstance where the heroine is a very young girl. She's 8 years old. Her carriage was sort of tossed into the river, and the hero, who is really a man from, well, he's a kid. He's 12 years old when they meet, and he comes from a family that is not of any means, no title, very simple family. He goes to the rescue, rescues her. They end up traveling into the woods and staying at this little cabin that they find. He is just this adorable little boy who is this man of honor at 12 years old who sees that she's in danger and goes to help her. It gave me big time Highwayman vibes from the beginning of the Highwayman. And he just is determined that she's going to be his just forever. And so they have this cute little meeting of when she was rescued by him, but that sticks with him for years, and his entire life is shaped by this meeting and this desire to be a man worthy to actually have his Fifi, as he calls her, for his own when he's grown up so that he can have her as his wife. And oh my gosh, Ophelia ends up growing up. She is a little disillusioned to some family situations that she has, and also realizes that her family is in dire need of some financial assistance. And so she's an exceptionally talented singer. She starts going out at night and trying to perform to earn money, and she catches the eye of the little boy hero, all grown up now, who hires her privately to come and sing for him. And that is when they meet as adults. It is a beautiful romance. It is so steamy, and it is just full of longing and passion, and I loved it so much. It was fabulous. Another book that I read, which was towards the end of the year, was Miracle on Ladies' Mile. This is a short story, short novella by Joanna Shupe. It's a Gilded Age romance, and it was absolutely delightful. I loved this so much. I gave it 5 stars. This is about our heroine who comes from the Midwest and is going to make a name for herself as a fashion designer, she hopes. She ends up having this job at a department store that is extremely well-known and very well-regarded, and she takes on the assignment of doing the window displays. As she is there, one night, she sort of ends up almost falling into this arrangement of water that she has made for a window display. This man who's been watching her, and he reaches in and saves her. They end up having this connection where he sort of goes and helps her at night to make these displays, and they have a great time getting along. She feels this desire, this draw for him that can't be denied, and he feels the same way about her. He is a widower, and he has a young daughter, and he actually is very high up in the company, but the heroine doesn't know it. And there was tension, there was angst, it was beautiful. I just loved it. It was a very quick read, and it was just fantastic. It was a highlight of the year for me. Loved it. And another historical that I recently read that was just barely released that I loved and adored so much is The Temptation of a Highlander by Elisa Braden. This is book 3 in her Highland Is It Midnight in Scotland series. It just barely came out. This is my favorite in the series so far. It was fabulous. It has everything that I want in a Highlander romance, with an extremely gruff, brawny, very protective Scottish hero who is just absolutely smitten with this heroine from the moment he saw her in previous books. And it was just a thing of beauty. Clarissa is our heroine. She is living with her grandmother, and she came out a few years ago, and she caught the eye of a man who then became obsessed with her and has become stalking her and has been sending her dangerous, bloody messages, letting her know that she will be his someday and that he's just waiting to make his move. So enter Campbell, the Scotsman, who comes to offer his home for her to stay at so they can track this man down and stop him from trying to hurt them. So she goes under his protection. She makes it her sort of job to enliven his home, to make it more beautiful, to add a woman's touch. And they are both, this is a case of these two who are both extremely attracted to one another and who have feelings for each other, but they don't think the other person does, and so they sort of dance around there, and it's just, the tension is so beautifully done. Their romance was, it was amazing. I loved it so much. This hero is one of my favorite Scottish heroes I've ever read about. I adored this book from beginning to end. I read it the night it came out, and I, like, literally at 10 p.m. when it released, I picked it up and had it read by the next day. I couldn't stop reading it. It was fantastic. I loved it so freaking much. Okay, and the last book on my list is The Lady Temps and Air by Harper St. George. This is book 3 in her Crenshaw family series, and this book actually doesn't release until February 22nd, but I received an arc of this, and over the holidays I was just sort of in the mood for it, so I picked it up and read it, and it became a new favorite. I loved this book so much. This is my favorite one in the series so far. This book is deeply emotional. It really deals with some heavier topics, about infertility and loss, and it's just beautifully heartfelt and emotionally well done. This also talks about how women were treated at the time and some progression that they were hoping to make for women's rights, having more equal treatment, which I felt like was really carefully done and was a really integral part of the story and the overall plot. I really enjoyed that. I particularly enjoyed Max, our hero, who is the heir to Crenshaw Iron. He is just an incredible hero. He's an American hero, and he lusts after Helena in a very respectful way. Like, he wants her so bad. He feels like they had a connection in book 2, and he is under the obligation to find a bride and to have an engagement before Christmas from his father, who has said that, okay, it's time for you to actually get married and produce an heir for Crenshaw Iron. And he says, if you don't, Max, I'm going to take this project away from August, who we met in book 1, and she's going to be devastated, and she won't be able to do everything she's been working for, trying to get her a name for herself as a woman in this company. So Max can't let that happen. He's determined to find at least a bride in name, have a fake engagement, and he decides to do that with Lady Helena. Lady Helena is also she's a widow, and she's running a home, basically a refuge for women and children who have no other place to go. She's trying to find a building and a place where she can expand and allow them more room to live and sort of get their feet underneath them and try and find a way to make a living. So she agrees because she needs his name attached to hers to secure funding for her to have this building and place that she is dreaming of for these women and children. And there are some sparks that are flying, some definite chemistry. They have a very intense physical connection. But Max can't stop thinking about Helena. He can't stop thinking about how much he longs to touch her, but also how he feels when he's with her, and how she listens to him, and how she respects him for his standards and his ideals, and how he's not going to cave to pressure from his father about things he wants to do in the company. Like, he loves and admires how she loves and admires him for standing up for what's right. And the same goes for her. Like, it's just beautiful. I really loved their romance. It was definitely a little bit hard-hitting, but it was emotional and beautiful, and I adored it. So 5 stars for that one. Be on the lookout for that in February. Okay, and then my runners-up are The Duke Who Didn't by Courtney Milan. This was absolutely a delightful friends to lovers historical romance. It was a little bit different than anything I'd ever seen. This has some Asian characters in here, and it was really, really beautiful, well done. And this is another case of mutual pining between these characters that has been happening for a very long time, and it was a delight. And then, of course, 2 other favorite books from the Ravenel series. The Ravenel series is definitely my favorite by Lisa Kleypas, and I've read her Wallflowers, her Hardy family series, or no, the Haven, her contemporary series with Hardy and Haven. The Travis family! I couldn't think of their last name. I've read that series, loved it. I've read the Hathaway series, loved it. I've read the Wallflower series, loved it. I've read some of her standalones, but the Ravenels, to me, is still Lisa Kleypas' best work. And so, these 2 were standouts for me. Chasing Cassandra, loved and adored Tom, loved this book so much. Devil's Daughter squeaked out just a little bit ahead of this one, but I still ardently loved this. And then Devil in Spring with Pandora. It was just fantastic. I loved this heroine. I loved the setup. These are two other favorites of mine from this series. So, alright, I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I'm sorry if it was super long, but these are some of the most memorable and most favorite historical romances that I read in 2021. Please feel free to let me know if you have a favorite that you read in 2021 as well. Thanks so much for watching, y'all. I'll see you in my next video.